Brandon Kirsch took one look at the woman who had just walked through the door, 71 years old, dark-skin floral dress, worn leather purse, reading glasses on a beaded chain, and he didn't even try to hide what he thought. He picked up a used King Air brochure from behind the counter, dropped it in front of her, and smiled. "Sweetheart, I think someone gave you the wrong address. The Quilting Expo is 2 blocks down." A salesman at the espresso bar snorted. Brandon kept going louder now, performing for the room. "Look around you. Do you see anyone in here who looks like you? This isn't a farmer's market, honey. The cheapest thing in this building costs more than everything on your farm combined." Real laughter this time. Open. Unashamed. He leaned on the counter, tilted his head like he was doing her a favor. "Tell you what, why don't you call one of your grandkids, have them explain to you what a Gulfstream actually is? Because $68 million is a lot of numbers for a grandmother to keep track of." The room laughed again. Nobody said stop. Nobody moved. She didn't flinch, didn't raise her voice, just stood there still patient, dark eyes steady on his face, the way a woman stands when she already knows exactly what's coming. Before that afternoon's was over, Brandon Kirsch would be the one begging to be heard. This is the story of Ida Mae Carter. Stay right here, every second matters. Comment where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if this channel is new to you, you're going to want to subscribe before this story is over. To understand what happened that Tuesday afternoon inside Summit Air Group, you need to understand who Ida Mae Carter actually was. Not the woman Brandon Kirsch profiled in under a minute the moment she stepped through the door. Not the floral dress, the white walking shoes, the worn leather purse hanging from one forearm. The real Ida Mae Carter, the one that started long before any of this, in a place most people have never visited and could not survive for a single week. Ida was born in 1953 in Sunflower County, Mississippi. Deep Delta country. Flat land stretching in every direction to a horizon so far away it appeared to curve with the weight of the sky above it. Cotton fields rolling on for miles past property lines her grandparents could walk to but never cross because none of that land belonged to them. Not 1 acre of it. They worked it their entire lives, rising before the sun every morning to tend soil soaked with their sweat and grief and none of their ownership. They harvested crops they would never profit from and handed the largest share over to a white landlord who barely knew their names, who referred to them by those first names at all times, who never once called either of them Mr. or Mrs. in 30 years of supposed business. That was the world Ida was born into. That was what she watched from the edge of a sharecropper's porch before she was old enough to walk the rows herself. And that was what she spent every year of her life refusing quietly and without drama to accept as a permanent condition. She was sharp from the beginning. Her teachers said so carefully, at first, the cautious way adults describe certain qualities in certain children when they are not sure the world will cooperate with what they are observing. Then openly as the years passed, and the evidence became impossible to ignore. Sharp with numbers especially. The way some people are born hearing music in spaces that register as complete silence to everyone standing beside them. Her mother reinforced it without rest. Study hard. Get out. Build something nobody can ever take from you. Those words stopped being instruction at some point and became something closer to bone the structure beneath everything she did. At 19, she moved to southwest Georgia, Albany area, red clay soil, long pecan orchards casting afternoon shadows in neat rows, a slower rhythm than the Mississippi Delta, but carrying the same complicated unresolved history buried deep in its ground. She met James Carter at a church picnic on a Saturday in June of 1972. He was 23 years old. Broad-shouldered, a man who chose each word with such care that every sentence he said felt considered long before he spoke it. He had a laugh that rose from somewhere deep in his chest and arrived without warning and filled whatever room it entered from corner to corner. She married him 11 months later, in a backyard ceremony with 37 guests, paper lanterns strung between oak trees, and a 3-layer cake her mother drove 4 hours to bake from scratch. James had land, 14 acres outside Leesburg, Georgia. Not much by any external measure, but it was his. Clear title. No debt. No landlord. Carter family hands in that soil going back 2 generations. Ida looked at those 14 acres, the way an architect looks at empty ground, already seeing walls and foundations and everything that wasn't there yet, but would be. They borrowed $12,000 from a black-owned credit union in Albany, the kind of institution that existed specifically because mainstream banks would not lend to people who looked like them. With it, they purchased a second-hand Massey Ferguson tractor with a cracked vinyl seat and an engine that coughed every cold morning of their first winter. Ida taught herself to repair it before their first harvest was complete. She did not wait for anyone to teach her. The early years were hard. They were supposed to be. They lost a third of their sweet potato crop to an early frost in the first season and replanted the following spring without a word of complaint between them. Steadily and methodically, the way people build things they intend to outlast themselves, they grew. More acreage purchased piece by piece. Better equipment. A small processing shed that expanded into a larger facility. Ida developed techniques for extending crop yield and reducing post-harvest losses that no one around her had thought to formalize into anything official. So she formalized them herself. She filed patents. 31 of them across the following decades, all in food processing and agricultural systems technology, all under her own name. Every one of them drawn from years of walking her own fields before sunrise. James died on a Wednesday morning in September of 2009. He was 55 years old. His heart stopped while he walked the east field at sunrise, as he had done without exception for 30 years. The paramedics found him on his back in the 3rd row of the pecan grove, face turned toward the Georgia sky boots, still darkened with morning dew. Ida buried him that Saturday. On Monday morning, she was back in the fields before anyone else arrived. She is not finished grieving. She still carries his brass-handled pocket knife in her leather purse, worn smooth from 30 years in his pocket. Not because she needs it for anything practical, but because she is not yet ready to put down something. His hands touched every single day. The land still needed tending. The people on it needed their wages. The business James had believed in before it became what it was still needed someone standing at its center. So Ida stayed. And then she accelerated in ways that surprised even the people who knew her best. Carter Agri Holdings grew into something staggering. 38,000 acres across Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, South Carolina, Florida, Tennessee, Arkansas, and East Texas. Specialty crop processing operations. 31 active patents. Private equity positions in 3 agricultural technology companies. 4,500 employees. In 2023, Forbes published the full account, The Quiet Billionaire. Ida Mae Carter and the $2.3 billion empire. Built from 14 acres. She read it once, left it on the kitchen table, and walked her fields before sunrise the following morning. She still wears floral dresses, still drives the dented 2011 Silverado, still wakes at 5 without an alarm. Her CFO, Harold Deshawn, had cleared $68 million for the G800 3 months prior. Everything was authorized, sitting and waiting. All she needed was someone willing to sell her the airplane. On a Tuesday morning in October, she climbed into the Silverado and drove 2 hours north to Houston. No appointment, no entourage, no briefcase. Just a 71-year-old woman with a pocket knife in her purse and $68 million she intended to spend before sundown. She did not check her reflection before walking through the front door. She never had to. And in that building, a salesman who had spent 11 years believing he could read any client in under a minute was about to make the most expensive mistake of his career. The Summit Air Group showroom sat beside a regional executive airport on Houston's northwest corridor. All glass and brushed steel cathedral ceilings visible from the parking lot, a building designed from the outside in to communicate a single specific message to anyone approaching it: the things inside here are not for everyone. Ida Mae Carter's 2011 Chevy Silverado pulled into the visitor lot at 1:30 in the afternoon and parked between a black Mercedes G-Wagon and a white Porsche Cayenne. The truck looked like it had arrived from a different decade, which it had. The dent in the rear quarter panel caught a brief flash of October sun as she cut the engine. The AM country station that had played for the entire 2-hour drive from Albany went quiet. She sat for a moment in the cab, looking through the windshield at the building. Then she opened the door, stepped down, smoothed the front of her floral dress with both hands, adjusted the beaded chain on her reading glasses, and lifted her leather purse over one forearm. At the hood of the truck, she paused and looked up at the Summit Air Group sign for exactly 3 seconds. Then she walked through the front entrance without hesitating or slowing down. The showroom was everything the exterior promised, and more. Italian marble floors in cream and charcoal, polished to a finish so high they held reflections like still water. A Cessna Citation. CJ-4 sat on a raised turntable near the center of the space, rotating slowly under gallery lighting, presenting itself to the room as though it were giving a performance. To the left, a live barista worked behind a mahogany espresso counter, preparing drinks for 2 men in fitted suits, who spoke in the low, settled voices of people for whom everything was already decided. A designer scent diffuser near the reception desk released something warm and composed into the air, sandalwood and cedar, the specific combination chosen by someone who understood that expensive rooms should smell like money without announcing it. Soft piano moved through hidden ceiling speakers, the kind of music chosen to make a space feel wealthy without appearing to try. Every surface in the room said the same thing: you belong here, or you don't, and you already know which one you are. Ida's white walking shoes met the marble. She moved toward the reception desk. The receptionist was in her mid-20s, dark hair pulled back precisely, a practiced professional smile that appeared automatically when the entrance door swung open. It appeared now. Then it flickered the way a light flickers when the connection isn't properly seated, as her eyes moved from Ida's face down to the floral dress, to the worn leather purse, to the comfortable shoes, and back up again. The smile remained, technically, but something behind it had been quietly switched off. "Good afternoon. Can I help you?" Before Ida could answer, he was already crossing the floor. Brandon Kirsch moved through the showroom with the ease of a man who had operated in exactly this environment for over a decade and considered it his natural habitat. 41 years old, sandy hair swept neatly back, a charcoal suit fitted to his body, specifically a Patek Philippe on his left wrist that he angled fractionally outward when he gestured, a habit so ingrained it was no longer conscious. 11 years at Summit Air Group. Top salesman for 7 consecutive years. His gift was not warmth, it was classification. Brandon Kirsch could assess a walk-in client in under a minute. Shoes, watch, car in the parking lot, posture, clothing. The aggregate calculation ran automatically efficiently and almost never produced the wrong answer. He completed the calculation on Ida Carter in 40 seconds flat. He moved forward with the composed manner of a man entirely in his element, extending no hand, offering no formal greeting, just a slight tilt of the head that implied helpfulness without fully committing to it. Good afternoon, ma'am. The word hovered precisely in the uncomfortable space between respectful and patronizing, close enough to either that you couldn't name one without being accused of imagining the other. Can I help you find someone today? Ida met his eyes without any shift in expression. I'd like to look at the G800. The pause lasted less than a full second. Not long enough to be theatrical. Long enough to be real. Brandon's smile held its position. What changed was the quality of attention behind it, the way a card player's focus changes when the hand is not what was expected, and the situation calls for a different kind of management. He turned his head toward the far side of the floor, where Miles Thornton, the floor manager, stood with reading glasses low and a tablet in one hand. Miles was 52, silver-templed 9 years, managing the summit floor without incident or complication. He looked over his frames at Brandon and raised one eyebrow barely, then gave a nearly invisible shake of his head. Not a warning. Not an instruction. Just a quiet acknowledgement that said, I see what you've got, and I'm leaving it entirely to you. That small gesture was its own kind of permission. Brandon turned back to Ida. The smile settled into something more comfortable. The G800, he repeated in the particular tone of a man who is repeating something while deciding what to do with it, rather than actually processing it. Of course. Give me just one moment. He turned and walked unhurriedly toward the far side of the floor with his hands in his jacket pockets. He didn't retrieve a single thing. There was nothing to retrieve. This was not preparation, it was pacing. The practiced art of making someone wait just long enough to establish something without being explicit about what is being established. Cassidy Wells, 26 years old and 6 months into her first professional sales role, watched him go from her desk near the window. Then she looked across the floor at Ida, still standing near the reception desk. Leather purse over one arm, reading glasses resting on their beaded chain against her chest, perfectly still in the way a person is still when they have spent a lifetime being made to wait for things that should have required no waiting at all. Something tightened in Cassidy's chest. She could not name it precisely yet, but she could already feel the shape of where this was going. Brandon Kirsch had already decided what this was. What he could not do, what he was constitutionally incapable of doing in that moment, was consider the possibility that he was wrong. In 11 years of reading people, he had never been significantly wrong. He believed this with complete and unexamined certainty. He had never been more mistaken about anything in his life. Brandon returned to the reception area 7 minutes later, with no documents, no spec sheets, and no preparation of any kind. What he brought was a new register. His voice dropped by half a tone and slowed by approximately a third, the unconscious recalibration people apply when addressing the elderly, the confused, or anyone they have already determined requires special handling. He came to stand beside Ida and placed both hands flat on the surface of the reception counter. All right. Before we go any further, I want to make sure we're all on the same page here. His tone was patient in the specific way that is not actually patience, but performance. Do you know what a Gulfstream G800 actually is? Ida held his gaze without any alteration of expression. Ultra-long-range large-cabin business jet. Rolls-Royce Pearl, 700 engines. Maximum certified range of 7,900 nautical miles. Capacity for up to 19 passengers. Cabin altitude of 4,000 feet at FL 510. Base configuration approximately 62 million, fully loaded closer to 68. Interior customization available through the Savannah Completion Center. Not a note in front of her. Not a single hesitation on any figure. Brandon blinked. Once. Twice. A brief, involuntary reset, the micro-expression of a man whose expectation and reality have just failed to align. Whatever he had prepared himself for, it had not been that. But the reset lasted barely 2 seconds before it was replaced by the expression of a man who has been mildly surprised and decided the appropriate response is to find it entertaining rather than informative. He turned his body toward the open floor and raised his voice to Carrie. "Phil! Hey, Phil, come over here a second. You've got to hear this." He gestured loosely in Ida's direction with one open hand. "Grandma here wants the G800. Laughter came from 2 points in the room almost simultaneously. Short, unguarded, careless, the kind of laughter that is not quite deliberate cruelty, but has no claim to innocence either. From her desk, near the window, Cassidy Wells looked up sharply. Her hands went still on her keyboard. What followed was 25 minutes of engineered absence. Brandon walked away from Ida without another word and directed his full and genuine attention toward a white man in a navy polo who had arrived several minutes after Ida and was now standing near the citation CJ4 display. The welcome was immediate and entirely different in character. Both hands extended direct eye contact, a smile that reached his eyes. Spec sheets appeared on the desk within 90 seconds of greeting. Coffee was offered without being requested. Brandon leaned comfortably on the counter in the posture of a man with unlimited time and began an animated, detailed conversation about range configurations, interior finish options, and estimated delivery windows. Ida did not move from her spot near the reception desk. She examined the scale model aircraft displayed in the cases along the far wall: a Cessna 172, a Learjet 3-1, a Hawker 800, a Citation X, a G650. She identified every one without reading a label. She had studied this industry for the better part of a year before walking through that door. She had done her research the way she did everything, thoroughly, quietly, without announcing it to anyone. At the 14-minute mark, a member of the cleaning crew appeared at her feet, mop in hand, working the marble floor in deliberate, widening arcs. His path brought him directly to the spot where Ida was standing. He cleaned carefully around her shoes, without making eye contact the way you navigate around a piece of furniture rather than excuse yourself to a person. Nobody asked him to stop. Nobody said a word. Cassidy watched from her desk. Her jaw was locked. Her hands were flat and motionless on the desk surface. A sales assistant materialized at Ida's elbow 10 minutes after that. "Ma'am, can I get you a chair? You can sit while you wait. Rest your feet a little." Ida looked at the chair the assistant was gesturing toward. Then she looked at the assistant. "I've been on my feet since 5 this morning," she said pleasantly. "A few more minutes won't trouble me." The assistant withdrew. Brandon circled back at the 25-minute mark with the energy of someone performing a minor favor for which gratitude was appropriate. "Still here? Good, good." He tilted his head with an expression that approximated concern. "Okay, I want to help you out, I genuinely do. But before we go any further, let's be honest with each other about what we're actually working with here." His hand came to rest lightly at Ida's elbow. A steering gesture, physical, casual, as though it were entirely natural, and he began moving her in the direction of the Phenom 300 display at the far end of the floor. The smaller section. Significantly lower price point. The area where Brandon redirected walk-ins he had already categorized and closed in his mind. Ida stopped walking. His hand fell away from her elbow. "I didn't come here for a Phenom," she said. Her voice had not changed by a single degree since she had first spoken inside that building. Measured, unhurried, entirely certain of itself. "I came here for the G800. I would like to see the configuration spec sheet and discuss delivery timelines." Brandon crossed his arms. Something moved through his expression, not quite anger, but the specific irritation of a man whose script is not being followed the way it is supposed to be followed. He had been doing this for 11 years. He knew exactly how this kind of conversation was supposed to proceed. This was not how it proceeded. "Before I pull anything on the G800 coin," he said, "I need documentation from you first. Proof of funds asset verification, a letter from your financial advisor. That's standard procedure at this price level." A pause, and then added with a particular softness that made it considerably worse. "Or do you perhaps have family members who handle your finances for you, dear? A son, maybe, or one of your grandchildren? It might be easier if I spoke with them directly." Ida looked at him for a long, steady, unhurried moment. "I'd like to speak with your manager," she said. Brandon waved one hand loosely in a dismissive arc, swatting at something small. "I'm who you talk to here. Miles backs me on this." Across the room, Thornton gave one slow nod, without lifting his eyes from the tablet, a wall smooth on the surface, solid all the way through. Brandon spread his hands as though the matter were now fully resolved. He was wrong. He was so completely and catastrophically wrong that the full weight of it would not reach him until the afternoon was nearly over. And he was only just getting started. Brandon Kirsch did not become Summit Air Group's top salesman for 7 consecutive years by failing to read a room. He had spent the last 25 minutes reading this one, and what he had decided was that this was not a client requiring management. What he had was an audience, and that changed everything about how he intended to handle the next few minutes. He crossed the reception area with the unhurried proprietary stride of a man who considers every surface in a building to be personally his, reached back with one arm, and lifted a chair from beside the welcome desk. He placed it down in front of Ida with a single smooth motion directly in her path, close enough that she would need to step deliberately around it to go anywhere, and lowered himself into it with ease. One leg crossed over the other. Arms settled comfortably in his lap. He made himself at home in it the way men make themselves at home in spaces that belong to everyone, which in their minds means belonging to them specifically. He looked up at Ida from this position and studied her openly, the studied, unhurried appraisal of a man who has decided what he is looking at and is simply taking his time confirming it. "All right," he said. His voice had moved up in volume, not dramatically, but precisely enough to carry to every occupied corner of the showroom. "Let me tell you what I think actually happened here today." The room went quiet, in the specific way that rooms go quiet when something worth watching is beginning. "I think you were driving past this building, maybe on your way back from the market, maybe running some afternoon errands." He gestured loosely toward the parking lot, toward the dented Silverado sitting between the Mercedes and the Porsche, like a visitor from a different world. "You saw the planes through the glass. Beautiful building, beautiful machines. And you thought, why not go in, have a look around, see how things are on that side of life. Maybe tell your grandchildren about it over dinner." He smiled. Thin. Sharp. The kind of smile that doesn't warm anything it touches. And there is nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing. But we both know that's what this is. So let's not waste each other's time pretending we're having a different conversation. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and dropped his voice by one deliberate register. "This is a $68 million aircraft, sweetheart." His eyes moved down her floral dress. Her sensible shoes back up slowly, deliberately, a full inspection conducted in plain view of a room full of people who chose not to look away. That number does not belong in the same conversation as what we have in front of us today. Dreams are available to everyone free of charge. Gulfstreams are not. I am not in the business of selling dreams. I am in the business of selling aircraft to people with the verified means to purchase them. He straightened, 2 small, unhurried tugs at his cuffs. "So here is my suggestion. Go enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Come back another time with someone who can sit down and handle the numbers properly. One of your grandchildren, perhaps someone a little more comfortable at this level of conversation. The showroom responded the way showrooms respond when a performance lands cleanly. A man near the window exhaled a short, approving sound. The woman in the cream blazer, who had been watching openly for some minutes, now pressed her lips together and looked down at her espresso cup. Two men at the bar had their phones raised. One tilted his screen toward the other. They exchanged a look. The recording was running. The man near the window turned toward Brandon and brought his palms together twice. Slow, deliberate. Two flat, hollow sounds in the quiet of the room, punctuation marks placed at the end of a sentence that should never have been constructed. Brandon caught it. He turned his head slightly and gave the man a small, acknowledging nod. The nod of a performer, recognizing someone in the audience who knows the craft. Then from across the floor, Cassidy Wells stood up. She was on her feet before she had fully made the decision. Her chair scraped back against the marble. Her hands were trembling against the edge of her desk. Brandon's head turned. His voice arrived without any increase in volume, the way voices built on genuine authority never need to be raised. Sit down, Reeves. Cassidy stopped. She looked across the floor at Ida, perfectly still, reading glasses resting on their beaded chain leather purse over one arm, entirely unmoved by every single thing that had been done to her in the last 40 minutes. And then she sat back down. She pressed her teeth together until the joint of her jaw ached with it. She would think about that moment for a long time afterward, the precise, specific sensation of a chair catching her weight when she should have kept standing. Ida Mae Carter stood alone in the center of a showroom filled with aircraft she could purchase outright without straining her accounts. The piano continued its loop through the ceiling speakers. The Citation CJ4 kept rotating on its turntable, indifferent to everything below it. The espresso machine hissed once behind the bar. Brandon remained in the chair he had placed as a physical barricade, still settled, still certain, watching Ida with the expression of a man who has handled something cleanly and is waiting for the room to confirm it. She reached into her leather purse. Brandon's eyes tracked the movement. Something moved across his face, small, involuntary, barely visible, but it was real. A brief, cold flicker of actual uncertainty, the first genuine moment in the entire hour she had been in his building in which he could not fully predict what was about to happen. She produced a phone. Small, silver, folded shut. A flip phone, the kind discontinued years ago, the kind most people in this room had not held in over a decade. She held it with the complete ease of a woman unbothered by the idea that anyone might find it remarkable. Near the espresso bar, one of the recording men saw it and leaned toward his companion. One of them almost laughed. Ida flipped it open. She dialed. The phone rang twice. "Harold?" Ida's voice was exactly what it had been all afternoon. Level, unhurried, the voice of a woman placing an order she fully expects to receive without discussion. "I'm at Summit Air Group in Houston. Go ahead and prepare the documentation for the G800. Full configuration." A pause on the line. "Yes, the $68 million one." Another pause. "Thank you, Harold." She folded the phone closed with a single soft snap and returned it to her leather purse with the same deliberate ease with which she had retrieved it. Clasped the clasp, settled the purse back over her forearm. She waited. Brandon Kirsch had heard the call from across the reception area. He turned from his chair with the particular unhurried slowness of a man who intends to make something of what he just heard and wants the room to watch him do it. He looked at Phil, the salesman, standing closest to him, and shook his head in a slow, deliberate arc, lips pressed together in performed restraint against something that apparently demanded expression. 68 million, he said, pitching his voice to carry across the near-silent room. She called Harold. He let a full beat pass. Then, leaning toward Phil in a stage whisper precisely calibrated to reach the espresso bar, Harold from the co-op, I'm guessing. Laughter broke from at least 3 directions at once. Open, genuine, unguarded the laughter of people who have decided they are watching something harmless and have given themselves permission to enjoy it. Phil laughed. The man who had slow clapped produced a short, approving sound. Even the woman in the cream blazer, who had spent the last several minutes growing visibly less comfortable in her own amusement, allowed the corner of her mouth to lift before catching herself and turning toward the window. Brandon stood stretched once and crossed his arms with the settled composure of a man who has closed out a situation efficiently and is ready to move forward with his afternoon. Harold is going to be very busy, he said to the room. Ida said nothing. She stood exactly where she had stood for the better part of 40 minutes. Same spot. Same posture. The particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have spent a lifetime in rooms that wanted a reaction from them and learned that offering none is its own complete and sufficient answer. The showroom returned to its regular rhythm. The piano resumed its loop. The citation on the turntable kept rotating. Brandon drifted toward the far side of the floor, loosening a cuff button, his mind already moving to other tasks, the Navy Polo client, a follow-up packet, an afternoon that was proceeding exactly as he had intended. The 2 men at the espresso bar settled back into their conversation phones loose in their hands. The afternoon's entertainment apparently concluded. A cleaning crew member collected his cart from near the reception area and moved on. The sandalwood and cedar from the diffuser continued reaching every corner of the room with equal indiscriminate coverage, the charcoal suit and the floral dress, the Italian marble and the worn leather purse, all of it held in the same composed, expensive fragrance. 4 minutes passed. The receptionist's computer produced a single soft chime. The notification sound that arrives dozens of times every hour and means nothing, triggers nothing, requires nothing. She reached toward the mouse out of pure professional habit, clicked and opened the email. She read the first line. She moved back to the top and read it again from the beginning. Then a third time slower, each word given individual attention, the careful rereading of a person who believes they may have misunderstood something and is taking deliberate steps to locate the misunderstanding before reacting to it. There was no misunderstanding. Her right hand rose from the keyboard and came to rest against her mouth. The color left her face in a quiet, steady withdrawal, not all at once, not dramatically, but with the gradual completeness of light leaving a room when heavy cloud cover moves across the sun. Slowly and entirely, and without any sign of returning. The email was from Harold J. Deshawn. His title in the email signature read, Chief Financial Officer, Carter Agri Holdings, LLC, Valdosta, Georgia. The body of the message was brief, formal, and professional. Attached to it were 2 documents. The first was a letter of intent to purchase one Gulfstream G800 fully configured to specification on behalf of Carter Agri Holdings, LLC. The second was a wire transfer authorization issued by the Institutional Banking Division of First Community Bank of Georgia. The receptionist's eyes moved to the authorized transfer amount. $68 million. She scrolled down. Account balance upon completion of transfer $2,247,000,000. She read that second number once, then again. The digits did not rearrange themselves. The decimal placement did not shift. The number on the screen was precisely what it appeared to be, and it had been there in that account the entire time this woman had been standing 15 feet away in a floral dress being told that Harold from the co-op was going to be very busy this afternoon. Her hand was trembling against her mouth. She became aware of the trembling and found she could not stop it. She looked up from the screen, and the first thing her eyes found was Ida Mae Carter, still standing in the same spot. Leather purse over one arm, reading glasses resting on their beaded chain, waiting with the same patient, unshakable composure she had brought through the front door with her more than 40 minutes ago. The receptionist turned slowly in her chair. Miles Thornton was on the far side of the floor, near the window wall, tablet in hand, reading glasses on scanning something that had nothing to do with what was currently displayed on the screen 20 feet away. She opened her mouth. The voice that came out bore no resemblance to her professional voice, the practiced, composed instrument she used every hour of every working day. What came out was something stripped of all of that. Something small, raw. Urgent in the specific way that urgency sounds when the person producing it has just seen something they cannot unsee. "Mr. Thornton." A pause. Then, "Mr. Thornton, I need you here right now. Please." The word please not offered politely, not extended professionally, but spoken with the bare, unvarnished urgency of someone who has looked at a screen and needs another set of eyes on it, immediately traveled across the showroom floor and reached Miles Thornton at a frequency that changed the pace of his feet before his mind had finished processing why. He looked up from the tablet. He began walking toward the desk. He had no idea that by the time he reached it, everything about his afternoon and a considerable portion of his professional future would look nothing like it had 60 seconds ago. Miles Thornton arrived at the reception desk at the pace of a man expecting to find something minor. He leaned over the receptionist's shoulder with the loose posture of a manager performing a routine review and looked at the screen. He did not speak for 4 full seconds. Then he straightened up with the careful slowness of a person who has received a physical blow and is still determining the extent of the damage. He removed his reading glasses, folded them in his hands. Then he looked at the screen a second time, without them, as though removing the lenses might cause the numbers to resolve into something different. They did not. He set the glasses on the desk. He picked up his tablet, opened the browser, typed 4 words, Ida Mae Carter. The results populated in under 2 seconds and did not require scrolling to understand. Forbes 2023. The Quiet Billionaire. Ida Mae Carter and the $2.3 billion empire built from 14 acres. Bloomberg Carter Agri Holdings posts 4th consecutive year of double-digit growth. Agricultural innovation. Quarterly cover feature. A photograph of a woman in a floral dress standing at the edge of a pecan grove at first light. Congressional Testimony 2021. 31 patents. 4,500 employees. 8 states. Net worth estimated at north of $2.3 billion. Miles Thornton set the tablet down on the desk surface with a care that had nothing to do with the tablet. His knuckles went white at the edge of the counter. He raised his eyes and found Brandon Kirsch across the floor, leaning against the far side of the reception counter, with one forearm on the surface, talking to Phil in the loose, satisfied manner of a man who has had a productive afternoon and is settling comfortably into the back half of it. He was smiling. Not the professional approximation, something closer to genuine. He had performed for an audience, the audience had appreciated it, and that for Brandon was as good as a working day got. Miles crossed the showroom. Deliberately. Not running, there was no version of moving quickly across this floor that would not draw every eye in the room, but with the controlled pace of a man who needs to cover distance without revealing why before he arrives. He reached Brandon. He took him by the elbow. He leaned in and spoke in a voice low enough that no one else could hear the words, though everyone in the immediate area could see the expression on Miles Thornton's face while he said them, and that expression was enough. Brandon's smile lasted 1 second after the words ended. Then it collapsed. Not faded, collapsed. Floor by floor, the way a structure falls when its load-bearing support is removed, suddenly and completely fast and total, and with the specific irreversibility of something that cannot be reconstructed from what remains. The muscles in his face went slack. His jaw came open by half an inch. His eyes moved once to Miles's face, confirming then away. Miles turned the tablet toward him. Brandon looked at this Forbes profile, looked at the Bloomberg feature, looked at the woman in the floral dress standing at the edge of a pecan grove in a photograph taken at sunrise in Georgia, looked at the wire authorization at $68 million, at $2,247 million remaining after the transfer was complete. He read the numbers a second time slowly, a third time with the focused grinding effort of a man whose understanding is fully functional and simply refusing to accept what it is being asked to accept. The comprehension was not the problem. The problem was that the comprehension was correct. The Patek Philippe on his left wrist, which he had tilted fractionally outward during client conversations all afternoon, angling it precisely into the ambient light, the way one angles a credential sat on his skin, now the way a costume sits on a man who has been seen through it. Still there. Still technically expensive. Completely, entirely beside any point. Brandon Kirsch turned. Ida Mae Carter had not moved. She occupied the same 16 square feet of Italian marble she had occupied for the better part of an hour. Same posture, same leather purse, same floral dress, same beaded chain resting against her chest, same comfortable, sensible shoes. The only thing that had changed were her eyes, which were now looking directly at him. Not with anger. Anger could be managed, absorbed, deflected by the practiced machinery of professional composure. What Ida Carter's eyes held was something that could not be managed. Something harder than anger and more enduring patience. The absolute unshakable patience of a woman who has spent 71 years watching people calculate her worth before she opened her mouth, and who has learned through the accumulation of a lifetime of such moments that the only reliable answer to that kind of certainty is to wait. To wait, and to know with complete clarity exactly what is coming. The entire showroom understood that something had broken. The espresso bar conversations had stopped entirely. The phone that had been recording for the past 20 minutes had been lowered. The woman in the cream blazer stood with her cup frozen halfway between the saucer and her lips held there in a posture she would maintain for the next several seconds without being aware of it. The man who had slow clapped was very still. Miles Thornton crossed the floor toward Ida. Each step felt to him separately deliberate heavy, carrying the full accumulated weight of everything he had permitted to happen in his building that afternoon, by standing 15 feet away and nodding. When he reached her, his voice arrived stripped of everything professional. The authority was gone. The composure was gone. The carefully maintained neutrality that had served him for 9 years as his most reliable management tool was entirely gone. What remained was just a man standing in front of a woman he had failed trying to find words adequate to the distance between where they were and where they should have been an hour ago. "Mrs. Carter." He swallowed. "Mrs. Carter, there has been a serious... Is there any way we could possibly begin this again? Please." Ida looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked past him, at Brandon standing beside the reception desk with the color completely gone from his face, at the salesman who had laughed, at the 2 men from the espresso bar phones, lowered silent now, at the woman in the cream blazer, at the whole room that had watched a 71-year-old black woman be made into entertainment for 45 minutes and found it convenient to do nothing. When she spoke, her voice was the same voice it had been from the moment she walked through the door. Quiet, measured, without hurry or heat. "Mr. Thornton," she said, "I think it's time I said a few things." The showroom was absolutely silent. Not the cultivated ambient silence of expensive rooms built to make certain people feel important. Not the looping piano and the distant clink of espresso cups and the warm, indifferent breath of the sandalwood diffuser. Genuine silence. The kind that happens when every person in a room stops breathing at the same moment without coordinating it, because something is being said that requires the whole body's attention. Ida Mae Carter looked at Miles Thornton standing before her with his stripped, unsteady voice and his exhausted face. Then she looked past him at Brandon, still positioned near the reception desk, the color entirely gone from his face, at the two men who had been recording, at the woman in the cream blazer, at all of it. The entire architecture of an afternoon that had been designed to make her feel small. She looked at it completely, and without flinching, and then she began to speak. She did not raise her voice. She had not raised it once in this building, and she did not raise it now. "My grandmother's hands," she said, "were split open every October. Cotton bowls will do that. The hulls are sharp, and when you work fast enough to meet the quota, you bleed." She picked cotton on land she would never own 6 days a week every harvest season of her adult life. She was never called Mrs., not once in 30 years by any person who employed her. She died having never owned a single acre of what her hands had worked. She paused. The room did not move. "My mother cleaned other people's homes for 30 years. She was excellent at it, and she was never acknowledged for being excellent at it because the work was considered beneath acknowledgement. She built everything I had from that work. She told me every day of my childhood to build something nobody could take from me." Her eyes found Brandon. He looked at the floor. "I have spent 50 years doing exactly that. I wake at 5 in the morning. I walk my own land. I have 31 patents and 38,000 acres and operations in 8 states and 4,500 people who depend on the thing I built from 14 acres and a broken tractor and $12,000 borrowed from the only bank in Albany that would lend to people who looked like me." The room was motionless. Even the piano seemed to have quieted, though it had not. "I did not come here today to prove anything to anyone. I came here to spend $68 million on a business asset I have spent 12 months researching. I had the funds. I had the specifications memorized. I had the delivery timeline mapped against my quarterly schedule. All I needed was someone willing to treat me like a customer." She stopped. Let the space between her last sentence and her next one hold everything the afternoon had been. "You turned that into a performance. You made me into a punchline for a room full of strangers, and not a single person in this building said stop." She picked up her leather purse. The same worn, clasp-worn purse that had been over her arm since she walked through the door. She smoothed the front of her floral dress, once a small, unhurried gesture, and turned toward the exit. At the threshold, she stopped. She turned back once and looked at the room with the level, measuring gaze of a woman who has chosen her last words carefully and intends them to stay. "When was the last time," she said quietly, "that you treated a woman who looked like me the way you treated the man in the navy polo this afternoon?" Nobody answered. Nobody moved. Nobody looked up. Nobody. She walked through the glass door. It swung shut behind her, without a sound. For 3 full seconds, the showroom held its breath. The Citation CJ4 kept rotating on its turntable. The piano looped back to its opening phrase. Then Miles Thornton turned toward Brandon Kirsch, and every employee on the floor watched through the glass partition as what followed unfolded in complete, managed silence. Brandon with his shoulders pulled in and both palms raised. Miles pacing with the focused, cold fury of a man calculating consequences rather than releasing emotion, which was somehow worse. The defenses came apart in order. How was I supposed to know Miles cut through it before it finished? She didn't look like worse, and Miles did not let it develop. I was following procedure, and Miles let that one sit in the air between them for a long time, because they both understood that no procedure in any document in this building contained any of what had happened in the last 45 minutes. At her desk, Cassidy Wells was not watching the glass-walled confrontation. She had opened her laptop, created a new document, and she was typing steadily with both hands flat and certain on the keyboard a formal written complaint addressed to Summit Air Group's corporate parent company. Every detail in chronological sequence, the deliberate 25-minute wait, the chair placed as a physical barrier, the cleaning crew directed around Ida's feet, the proof of funds demand she had never seen applied to a white male client in 6 months of employment, the offer to involve her grandchildren, the slow clap, the recording phones, the floor manager's nodded endorsement, 29 minutes of uninterrupted typing, employee ID attached, sent. She closed the laptop and looked at the marble where the cleaning crew had worked around Ida's shoes. Outside, the 2011 Silverado moved through late Houston traffic at a steady, unhurried pace. The AM country station played low. Ida's hands rested on the wheel without gripping it. She called her granddaughter Keisha. "Baby," she said when Keisha answered, "do you still have that journalist's number? From the conference in Atlanta, Tanya Okafor." Keisha said she did. The number arrived by text 30 seconds later. Ida set it in her lap, drove 2 more blocks through the afternoon light, and dialed. Tanya Okafor answered on the first ring. Not surprised, not uncertain, just ready the way people are ready when a call they have been waiting for finally comes. "Ms. Okafor," Ida said, "I have something I think you need to hear." Tanya Okafor's investigative segment aired on KHOU, Channel 11 Houston, on a Wednesday evening during the 6 o'clock broadcast. The title held on screen in white letters against a black background for 3 full seconds before anyone spoke. Grandma with $2.3 billion. How Summit Air Group turned away one of America's wealthiest black women. Then the audio began. Brandon Kirsch's voice captured in full digital clarity on the phone Ida had kept running in her leather purse from the moment she stepped through the front door of Summit Air Group-filled living rooms across the Houston-Galveston area. The slow descending register of a man speaking to someone he had decided required special handling. The floral dress appraisal, delivered in front of a room that laughed along. The brochure for the used King Air slid across a counter like a consolation prize. And then the line, the one that would travel furthest and stay longest. "Why don't you let your grandchildren handle this, sweetheart? These are a lot of numbers for anyone to keep track of." Then Ida's voice, even and unhurried. "I've been running my own business since 1974. Since before you were born." Tanya let the laughter that followed run for 9 uninterrupted seconds. No commentary, no graphic, no anchor interjection. 9 seconds of a room full of people laughing at a 71-year-old black woman who had arrived with $68 million and been offered a used turboprop brochure instead. Tanya let America hear every second of it. By midnight, the segment had been viewed 3.1 million times on the station's website. By 4 in the morning, every major national network had picked it up. By the time Ida walked her fields at 5 o'clock Thursday morning, red Georgia clay under her shoes and the pecan grove still dark ahead of her, the hashtag Grandma with 2 billion was trending nationally in the top 3. The clip that traveled furthest was 4 seconds long. Brandon's laugh isolated from everything else, stripped of context, and made more devastating by its absence. 4 seconds of pure, unconsidered contempt directed at a woman who had built $2.3 billion from 14 Georgia acres. People shared it with a single line beneath it. This is what it sounds like. 3 other black women came forward within 48 hours. A Houston cardiologist, a real estate developer from Atlanta, a technology company founder from the Bay Area. 3 cities, 3 different luxury businesses, 1 identical script, the same eyes, the same assumptions, the same management of the situation. Tanya Okafor aired their accounts the following Monday and let each woman speak without interruption for as long as she needed. The civil rights lawsuit was filed in federal district court 14 days after the segment aired. The named defendants were Summit Air Group and Brandon Kirsch individually. The charges encompassed racial discrimination, gender discrimination, and age discrimination under federal public accommodation law and Texas civil rights statutes, 3 distinct protected categories violated in a single 45-minute interaction documented on audio, captured on Ida's phone, recorded on Summit's own security cameras from 4 angles, and corroborated in a detailed written account filed by an employee who had been present for the entirety of it. The discovery process was precise and ruinous. Summit Air Group's internal sales records, subpoenaed and produced in full, revealed a pattern so consistent across 4 years it had the functional character of unwritten policy. Black and Latina women clients were asked for proof of funds before viewing aircraft specifications at a rate 8 times higher than white male clients. Average documented engagement time for black women. Walk-in clients, 6 minutes. White male walk-in clients, 41. Rate of steering toward lower-priced inventory 6 times higher for women of color. Every number from every quarter of 4 consecutive years, all of it recorded in the company's own database, all of it confirming the same conclusion in 4 separate directions. Cassidy Wells' written complaint was entered into evidence without alteration. Her deposition ran 3 hours and 22 minutes. She answered every question directly in complete sentences without consulting notes. When asked why she had submitted the complaint the same day rather than waiting, she said, "Because I had already waited too long by the time I sat back down at my desk." Brandon Kirsch was terminated by Summit Air Group the morning following the lawsuit's filing, not suspended, not placed on administrative review, terminated, as the company moved with urgent efficiency to separate itself from its most visible liability. He filed a wrongful termination counterclaim. His attorney reviewed the audio recording, the security footage, and 4 years of internal sales data, and advised him to withdraw. He withdrew it before the week was out. The settlement was announced in federal court on a Thursday afternoon, presided over by Judge Renee Colston. Summit Air Group agreed to pay $4.7 million in compensatory damages, implement a complete restructuring of client engagement protocols across all locations, establish enforceable anti-discrimination policies with independent accountability measures, and submit to third-party audits annually for 5 consecutive years. Judge Colston noted in her closing statement that the case represented not a single salesman's lapse in judgment, but a systemic institutional failure that had been operational consistent and financially sustained for years before a 71-year-old woman with a flip phone and a worn leather purse had walked through a glass door and refused to be made smaller. Ida sat at the plaintiff's table in a floral dress, the same kind she had worn every day of her adult life. Her attorney sat beside her, reviewing documents. When Judge Colston completed the settlement terms, and the room acknowledged the conclusion of proceedings, Ida did not smile. She did not look toward the cameras in the gallery. She nodded once, a single, slow, deliberate movement, the nod of a woman who asked for something specific and received something close enough to it to mean something. That afternoon, she donated the entire $4.7 million settlement to a scholarship fund supporting black women farmers across Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Florida. She named it the James Carter Agricultural Legacy Fund. Every penny went in. Nothing was kept. The fund's first grant cycle opened 60 days later. 47 applications arrived in the first week from women farming red clay in counties that had never had anything like this available to them because nothing like it had ever existed for them before. 6 months after the settlement, Ida Mae Carter went to buy her airplane. This time she went somewhere that knew how to treat a customer. Meridian Sky Partners occupied a modest single-story building on the south side of Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson corridor, situated between a cargo freight office and a regional aviation services company, whose sign needed repainting. The lobby held 4 chairs, a coffee maker on a side table, and a framed photograph mounted beside the door. Darnell and Keisha Osei standing in front of a Beechcraft King Air on a tarmac. Both of them squinting slightly into the sun, both of them grinning the first aircraft they had ever brokered 8 years ago when Meridian Sky Partners consisted of the 2 of them, a shared spreadsheet, and a kitchen table in their apartment off Cascade Road. Ida Mae Carter's Silverado pulled into the lot on a Wednesday morning in March and parked near the entrance. Same truck, same dent. The AM country station went quiet when she turned the key. She stepped out. Floral dress, white walking shoes, reading glasses on their beaded chain, leather purse over one forearm. She had walked her fields at 5 that morning and driven 3 hours north with the window cracked and the radio on low. Darnell met her at the door before she reached it. Handshake direct, firm, 2 hands, meeting without any calculation behind it. Keisha appeared from the interior office with 2 cups of coffee, set them on the table, and sat down across from Ida with her notepad open to the first page of actual work. No flickering assessment. No recalibration. No adjusted smile. 2 people running a business meeting, a person ready to do business with them. That was all it was. That was everything it needed to be. The transaction took 2 hours and 38 minutes. Configuration specifications confirmed against Ida's notes. Delivery timeline mapped to her quarterly schedule. Harold Deshawn joined by phone for the wire authorization and completed his portion in 9 minutes. When the paperwork was finished, Darnell walked Ida to her truck, and Keisha stood at the door of the building, and they spoke about the Tennessee facility expansion for a few minutes in the cool March air before Ida climbed into the cab, and the last thing Keisha said was, "Safe drive home, Mrs. Carter, and thank you for trusting us with this." Ida said, "Thank you for treating it like business." The Gulfstream G800 was delivered to a private hangar outside Valdosta, Georgia, on a Thursday afternoon in April. White fuselage catching the late afternoon sun at a low angle. Rolls-Royce engines ticking and cooling after the delivery flight. The faint smell of jet fuel carried on a light easterly wind, mixing with red Georgia clay from the fields beyond the perimeter fence. Ida stood on the tarmac for a moment. Just stood. Looked at it. She thought about James. About what he would have said here on this tarmac, looking at this airplane that had grown from 14 acres and a second-hand tractor and a woman who refused to stop. He would not have said much that was not his way, but his laugh would have arrived without warning and filled the open air around the hangar, and then he would have gone quiet and stood beside her and looked at it for a long time. She climbed the boarding steps, sat in the cabin seat by the oval window, looked out at the Georgia flatlands below the hangar, approached the same flat red earth horizon she had walked before dawn that morning, the same landscape she had looked at from a pickup truck and a tractor seat, and 2 bare feet in the soil for 50 years. She reached into her leather purse and took out James's pocket knife, held it in both hands. The brass handle was warm from the inside of the bag. She held it for a moment without opening it, then placed it carefully back in the purse and clasped the clasp. She folded her reading glasses into her lap. Then, briefly, she pressed them against the oval window to look at the fields beyond the fence line. The lenses left a small smudge on the glass. She did not wipe it off. The Summit Air Group case moved through the wider industry in the months that followed like a slow, clarifying tide. 5 competing luxury aviation firms launched internal equity reviews before any external body requested them. A national consumer rights organization published a report on discrimination in luxury retail that named the Carter case as its central reference, and 3 industry trade groups revised their client engagement guidelines before the year was out. In April, 2 United States senators entered the audio recording from Ida's phone into the congressional record during a Commerce Committee session on retail discrimination, and the clip of Brandon's voice, the full 9-second laugh, played in a Senate hearing room for the first time. Cassidy Wells was recruited by a competing aviation dealership within 4 months of leaving Summit, approached specifically because her name had become associated with the precise quality that most hiring managers claimed to value and rarely encountered in practice. She was promoted to senior sales associate in 5 months, the fastest in the company's history. On her first day, her manager told her, "You did the right thing when it cost you something real. That's the only kind of right that counts for anything." Brandon Kirsch applied to 11 luxury sales positions over the following year. His name produced the same result in every search. He took a commission-based role selling commercial property insurance in a beige-carpeted office in Katy, Texas, with fluorescent overhead lighting and a coffee machine that nobody had serviced in months. He was offered opportunities to issue a formal public apology on 3 separate occasions by his attorney during proceedings by the court mediator and once in writing by Ida's legal team. He declined every one. That refusal became, in the end, the detail that followed his name most persistently through every search engine and every background check that would ever be run on him. Not what he had done, but the fact that with every door open to saying he was wrong, he had chosen not to walk through a single one. Ida was invited to deliver the keynote at the National Association of Black Business Owners annual conference in Washington, D.C. in September. The ballroom held 1,100 people, founders, investors, executives, the kind of room that carried the specific weight of people who had built things in a country that had not always wanted them to. She walked to the podium in a floral dress and white walking shoes. No notes, no slides, no prepared text of any kind. She spoke for 9 minutes about her grandmother's split hands, about 14 acres outside Leesburg, Georgia, about a broken tractor and a $12,000 loan from the only bank in Albany that would say yes, about James, about what it costs to build something across 50 years in a country that is frequently uncertain whether you should be permitted to build things at all, about what it means to walk through a door that was not designed with you in mind, and walk through it anyway, and keep walking. When she finished, 1,100 people rose from their chairs. The applause lasted longer than the speech. Ida stood at the podium and let it happen without moving. She did not smile for the cameras. She did not raise a fist. She simply stood in her floral dress, in a city far from the Georgia fields. She would walk again before sunrise the following morning and let 1,100 people tell her in the only language available to them in that moment that they had heard her. At 41,000 feet, somewhere over the Georgia-Tennessee border, on a clear October morning, she sat by the oval window of her G800 and looked down at the land red clay fields and green crop rows and the long geometry of irrigation lines visible even from this altitude. James Carter, Agricultural Legacy Fund, was processing its 3rd grant cycle, 61 applications. Women farming land in counties that had sent nothing to anything like this before because nothing like this had existed for them. Her reading glasses rested in her lap. James's pocket knife was in her purse. The small smudge her lenses had left on the oval window was still there, faint against the blue of the sky. She had never wiped it off. She never would. Dignity does not announce itself. It doesn't arrive in a tailored suit or carry the right watch. Sometimes it walks through your door in a floral dress and comfortable shoes with a worn leather purse and $68 million asking for nothing more than to be treated like a human being. The question was never whether Ida Mae Carter belonged in that room. The question was whether that room was worthy of her. Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Stories like this one deserve to be heard. And if you haven't subscribed yet, you already know you should.